And since you're here, please like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content as well so that more people get to know about Bharata first. Well, Prime Minister Narendra Modi on Thursday joined US President Joe Biden, Israeli Prime Minister Yair Lapid, and UAE President Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan at the first virtual summit of the four-nation grouping I2U2, or the West Asian Quad. The joint statement of the grouping said India, Israel, UAE, US convened for the first leaders meeting of the I2U2 Group, with a particular focus on joint investments and new initiatives in water, energy, transportation, space, health, and food security to mobilize private sector capital. The leaders expressed their determination to leverage well-established markets to build more innovative, inclusive, and science-based solutions to enhance food security and sustainable food systems. In this edition of the Discourse, we will analyze the I2U2 summit. Joining me on the program today are Jayant Das Gupta, former ambassador of India at the WTO, Major General Dhruv C. Katoj, retired Director, India Foundation, and Pramit Pal Chaudhary, foreign editor of the Hindustan Times. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of the Discourse. Pramit, let me start the program with you first. And, we've also taken a few viewer questions as well. And the general trend of the questions that came in was, what is the main purpose of this particular grouping, the I2U2 or the West Asian Quad, and what do these countries plan to achieve through this?
So the heart of this is really the United Arab Emirates. This is their initiative, and you have to look at it from their perspective. So what the Abu Dhabi royal family has seen is that a couple of things are coming together. One, the northern Persian Gulf is now dominated by Iran. And they're looking at a future in which their primary source of revenue, which is basically oil, has, should we say, a limited future. So they looked at this and said, what exactly is going to be the future of the UAE as an economic grouping? So what they've tried to do, I would argue, is make themselves an economic hub for the future. I mean, oil is still doing very well right now, so that's not really an issue. They're reaching out to see if their relationship with Iran, which has been relatively hostile, can be improved. But their game is, we want to be sure that we have an economic, should we say, position in the future. So one element of this is physical connectivity. And that's where the food corridor that has been mentioned is important. So between India and the United Arab Emirates, they're building and investing. They've already announced $2 billion for agro parks, but they've also been investing in container ports, piers, and so on, with the idea that a container or anything moving from India can go to the UAE relatively seamlessly. They're also building an Etihad rail system that runs from the UAE through Saudi Arabia all the way to Jordan and Israel on the other side. And eventually their idea is that a container leaving Mumbai should go all the way to Israel and then from there to Europe, which is the obvious market at the other end, at almost double, if not faster speed than the present path, which is to go via the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. That's the physical connectivity that the UAE is building. And it's important to realize that Saudi Arabia is the fifth member of I2U2, but it officially cannot join because Israel, they don't recognize Israel yet. The second part of that, so that's one of the reasons that you have an India-UAE FTA, because that provides the facilitation and standards agreement that basically lies on top of that connectivity. Then India will then have a GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council FTA, which will incorporate Saudi Arabia. It has restarted negotiations with Israel, and eventually, hopefully, it will have one with the European Union at the other end. The UAE obviously is much further ahead on the FTAs, but the FTAs that these countries are now doing with each other, with India in many ways having to catch up, is the other element. Then the final element, which the UAE wants to do, is make themselves a technology hub. So they're a huge investor in the Israeli startup ecosystem. They're also a relatively large investor in India's ecosystem, and I should add Saudi Arabia as well through their Their sovereign wealth fund is again a very large investor, both in India and Israel. So the game is that UAE then becomes both a financier and a place, if you wish, for technology, startups, and so on to come to have their beginnings. They want to make their ease of doing business, if you wish, to be as in the best in this region, and to act as a gateway between the South Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. If you want countries that I think they're modeling themselves after, are countries like Ireland in Europe, or even Switzerland, basically a neutral place, low taxes, great place for corporations and entrepreneurship, but well connected to everybody else. And this is at the heart of it. And this makes sense for India because we can start to produce we are now becoming competitive, should we say, in some issues like agriculture. And if the UAE or America and other countries are prepared to pay for the kind of infrastructure that we've always lacked into developing sensible agricultural commodities that meet international standards, then all the better. And eventually manufactured goods and technology digital products from India would also fit into this.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that bit of information, and really what's the key focus as far as this grouping is concerned. Ambassador Jayandas Gupta, let me come across to you now. A bulk of the focus of the summit has been on economy, trade, and all those other aspects. Energy security is something else that has come up extensively as well. But most important of them all would be food processing. And if you look at India has not been a traditional powerhouse as far as food processing is concerned, but it looks like these countries want to change all of that. Do you see that happening?
Yes, for two reasons. One, that India has been going up very steadily in its agricultural exports. If you look at the last figures available, India's agricultural exports amounted to about $49 billion against about $38 billion in the previous year. So that is a huge jump. Of course, the pandemic also contributed to it because there were issues. But having said that, India is basically a primary product exporter in agriculture. It is cereals, it is sugar, it is tea, it is buffalo meat, and spices. So these are the major products which India exports. Now, if we want to extract more, and of course, fresh fruits and vegetables also, which form a part of the basket. If we want to go up the value chain, we have to export processed foods, which the UAE currently buys from the Europeans and from the Americans and Canadians and Australians. So that is a challenge. And hopefully this investment which will come from the UAE and technical expertise from Israel and the US and maybe from other countries as well, which have this kind of technology, it will enable us to bridge this gap and move up the value chain rather than just exporting plain rice and sugar and wheat and the spices. We can go in for the same kind of products that the Europeans, for instance, export. They do not export much of primary products in agriculture, but processed food. And that is the way to go. The other point that I wanted to mention is that there is a kind of complementarity in this agreement in the sense that the focus is basically on the UAE and India. India would like to rely on, Pramit has mentioned several very important points, but India also wants to secure itself on the energy front. And one of the large green hydrogen initiatives which India has taken, the UAE has provided the land and we have set up the solar panels, the huge solar farm, which will provide the hydrogen, which will, the electricity which will provide hydrogen. So this is going to, again, synergize the relationship because hydrogen, once it is produced, it will have to be transported in the form of ammonia or some other compound. So the issue which Pramit mentioned about the piers and the seamless movement of containerized cargo, that would be very important from the point of view of our energy security, and from the UAE's point of view, securing its food interests, that because especially which has come into sharp focus now because of the Ukraine-Russian war, and the global commodity prices rose. Now, of course, they are showing a downward trend. So these are the two major, I think, thrust areas. And in the press statement also, energy security and food security have been given the pride of place, though there are 4 other areas like space, health, water, which have also been identified amongst the 6 areas in which there would be cooperation.
Absolutely. General, I'd like to bring you in now. There are some analysts who have been closely watching this from a strategic point of view as well, to see if there could be anything strategic brewing out of this. Is there something that is there for China to worry about, and are we going to see something on those lines? Your thoughts on that?
Thank you, Frank. You see, I think the economic dimensions have been brought out very clearly by Pramit and the ambassador. There is no gainsaying the fact that that is what the real engine is. But it cannot just be that. You see, why should the US jump into this? What interest does the US have? Okay, the UAE is doing well, they're tying up with India. I can understand those interests, but why is the US coming, right? And this is where I think the strategic interest comes in. There is no direct defense tie-up between these countries. But in my view, there is a very strong strategic linkage. And that linkage comes into the way China has actually entered into West Asia, and the inroads which China has also made in Israel. There is very strong technological cooperation between Israel and China. And we have seen the way in which China has entered into West Asia, and also specifically into Iran. Now, this has not gone down very well with the US, because their influence is waning, and they had hit rock bottom actually post-Afghanistan. So I think President Biden thought it high time to do something about it, and this came as a great opportunity. You see, post the Abrahamic Accords, within a year of that, we get the external affairs ministers of the 4 countries actually getting together, and within 8 months of that, we find such an important summit taking place in which major initiatives have been announced. I think on the food front itself, it's about $2 billion. And on the energy front also, it's in excess of $2 billion. I don't have the exact figures with me, but it's substantial. And it is set to grow. So now when we are talking about $4 to $5 billion of investment, within 5 years, it may be something to the tune of $20 to $50 billion. We don't know. The potential is huge. Now, I think this is going to be straight away a message to the region that, listen, China may have the BRI, but we are also players in this game, right? We've also got an economic forum, and we will also assist. So that becomes now a countervailing presence as far as China is concerned. It is not a direct threat to China, but it is a countervailing force. So now people have an option. And I think once they have that option, I have a feeling that less Iran, the West Asian countries, I have a feeling I know which way they will go. The second point which I wanted to mention here is, when we are looking at the 2 countries, specifically Israel and the Emirates. Now, both of them are small countries, but both of them are technologically very proficient. Israel, of course, is the leader. The UAE wants to get there. But ultimately, when we're looking at the startups in those countries, they have a very small market. Now, if you really want to expand the market, then it makes great sense to tie up with India. And when you tie up with India and you have the Americans as a partner, now you see miracles can take place. When we simply look at the food parks which will be created, the land is being provided by India. You will find the technology being provided by Israel and the Emirates. You will find the finances being provided by the Emirates and the USA. And everybody gets to win. Now, to have some sort of a grouping of this nature where everybody gets to win is very rare actually in international diplomacy. But I think here they have struck the right chords, which is fine, which is why you don't find any disturbance anyway. Saudi Arabia is quite pleased with it. I don't see any. I haven't seen any negative word even coming from Iran. Very frankly, though, I think Iran will be concerned. And the last point which I want to bring about is, there is that fear in the Arab nation that the oil will eventually run out. They have to do something different. There is also the factor of who is going to take leadership of the Muslim world. So you will find that the Gulf will always be in a state of turmoil. It is not going to be in a cooperation in that sense amongst the Gulf countries, especially when you take the rift between the Shia and the Sunni communities. So that is why I think even the Emirates are looking outward to say, okay, how do we look at the future? And right. I think they have chosen a very wise decision of partnering with India, which is going to be a very great economy when we look at it a decade or 2 decades from now. And when you put in the other two very major powers, Israel as a technology power and the US as a superpower, I think it becomes a very strong and heady combination, frankly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. That's a very interesting point that you brought about, General. I want to take that up, and take that up as well and take it forward, because there's a viewer question as well on very similar lines. You mentioned, and Pramit also mentioned, how there aren't too many issues or problems as such within these nations. And apart from a couple of countries who could be possibly a little concerned, there isn't any problem as such. Here's a question from one of the viewers, which is on those lines that I'd like to take up with you, Pramit. So, Ankit Kumar asks, what are the challenges or the political challenges that may come out of I2U2?
I think the issue is, as the General has mentioned, there are a number of fault lines. There are, West Asia being what it is, there are many fault lines. And you can see the UAE is trying to figure out how to paper them over. In fact, today, the UAE foreign minister publicly said, we are not going to be part of an anti-Iranian alliance, very clearly indicating to Iran that what the UAE's vision of the region is going to be about an economic understanding between the countries. And it is not about a balance of power game, which is something that Saudi Arabia tried very hard to do and then failed when it eventually ran aground of the problem in Qatar. But the UAE is basically laying out a carrot to the Iranians and saying that, look, we are not going to encourage a military bloc against you, but we've got a lot of economic opportunities here. And your country, Iran, while it has a lot of oil right now, what is your future going to look like? Your GDP is now, if I remember correctly, 40% smaller than Saudi Arabia's, despite having a much larger population. So this is an economic opportunity for you. The UAE has also sort of mediated at least a temporary truce to the battle between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, who, despite both being Wahhabi kingdoms, have despised each other for decades, and has basically tried to say the same. They'll end the blockade and will now try to bring Qatar into this picture at some point. They've even proposed, I believe, that Etihad Rail would also encompass Qatar at some point. The UAE in its private discussions with India have also been a little skeptical about the future commitment of the United States to the Middle East. That the United States is now fundamentally energy independent of the Persian Gulf. The Afghan withdrawal and this general sort of disinterest in West Asia that's evident was evident partly in the Obama administration, but it's continued under the Biden administration, is something that they are nervous about. In which case the UAE feels that in at least the medium term, they must build up their own structure of alliances and agreements. And one of the countries who they want to bring into the Persian Gulf as an external player is India. If you remember, Biden, after he came to power, 3 months after he came to power, he produced an interim national security guidelines paper. And what was interesting is that the Middle East was demoted to the same level as Africa. And Central Asia was actually not even mentioned once. It was just dropped altogether as a country, as an area of strategic consequence. Indo-Pacific, the Atlantic, end of story. That was basically the Biden government's point. Now, it hasn't necessarily worked out the way they wanted to, but it's clearly something that the UAE would look at and say, we have to be looking for our own future in all of this. Yes, America will be here, but we don't know how long and what type of commitment will be there. But it's important to realize, and this is something India will have to watch, is that the UAE is also very clear that they want China to be part of this new economic arrangement, not to be a member of I2U2. But for example, they have defied Americans in calls that they not use Huawei telecom equipment for their infrastructure. Now, this will be a problem because, India is very clear. They do not want Indian data to run through Huawei technology equipment, because Huawei transfers a lot of that data to China. And so if you are going to have a digital economic relationship with India, how far will an Indian startup be able to function in or maybe based out of Abu Dhabi, if that's the case? And as a general correctly said, the Israelis have tried very hard to maintain an economic relationship with China because it's very profitable. But America squeezed them very hard and basically said, you may make money out of China, but your strategic relationship and your defense depends on us. So this is unacceptable. So we'll have to see where these are the kind of things that the UAE is going to have to be, its diplomacy, if you wish, will have to be tested. How can we balance all of these items? But so far, they're doing a pretty good job.
Right.
As you said, as the general mentioned, virtually no country, in fact, has come out against anything they've done so far. Even the Americans have said, okay, fine, you go ahead and use Huawei. They've told the Americans, we will not buy F-35 fighters, we'll buy French fighters because we want to send a message of neutrality. So we will be a treaty ally, but we will maintain a certain distance from the United States on a few things. So you can see this game, and I think the UAE in particular is in the driver's seat. And what is now happening is I think Saudi Arabia is taking the lead from the UAE. And it's one of the reasons like Prime Minister Modi has gone out of his way to maintain as strong a relationship as possible with the Abu Dhabi royal family, because he can see that these guys are the ones with the ideas for the future of the Persian Gulf area. And their idea incorporates a lot of India in it. And you saw that the Prime Minister made a stopover to condole the death of the Sheikh. And Al Nahyan went and met him at the airport and embraced him in public and said, this is a very clear indication of what they felt strongly. And in the Gulf in particular, especially Emirates, who meets you at the airport is always considered a very important sign of how strongly or how importantly they take you.
Absolutely. Ambassador Dasgupta, coming back to you now, let's shift the focus of the discussion and try and understand, what's to gain really, and how can these four countries complement each other?
Well, you have to look at it from the perspective of each country separately. The Abrahamic Accord of 2020, in which Morocco and Bahrain also participated with Israel and the UAE, that has really been a game changer. And as far as the strategic relations are concerned, the Bahrain government is buying drones and anti-drone technology from the Israelis, presumably to counter the threat from Iran, if such a threat ever becomes reality. The Israelis have, as the general mentioned, they have a lot of technology, but they also need to scale it up and to sell it to the rest of the world. And for that, the UAE offers a very good base. Dubai, as you know, has become a very important financial services center. And the Israelis are making their foray into fintech. And with their expertise in software development and other areas, they are surely going to make a mark. So they are looking at it from these perspectives. The good thing is that the Saudis are also now talking to Iran, mediated by Baghdad. And if the tensions do come down, and they ought to, because everybody in the Gulf is looking at a post-US, post-oil scenario 15 years from now, when the reliance on oil will come down appreciably for most countries. So they are all trying to strengthen their technological base, diversify into areas, and in Saudi Arabia and many of the Gulf countries, there is a real problem of unemployment. There is a large number of people who are well educated, who are capable of working, but there are no jobs. So that is something which they would like to obviate by building up their technological base and getting into areas which does not necessarily mean, is linked to the oil economy. So from the point of view of the UAE and the other Gulf countries, because I'm sure this would get expanded over a period of time if it succeeds in its initial 2-3 years. And if the US administration, let us say after Biden, 3 years from now or 2.5 years from now, if it continues with its commitment to this Asian Quad, West Asian Quad, there would be other countries which also would like to join. So all in all, I think, and as was mentioned, the US is basically, I think, again, refocusing in the Indo-Pacific. It is primarily a contained China policy. In the West Asian Quad case, the strategic interest is primary for the US. First, it is about getting the Israelis closer to the Gulf and getting them out of a warlike situation and less stressful situation where they can cooperate and build up their economic strengths. The second issue is about containing China, because if the Chinese control with their BRI projects, with their finances, with their presence in the Gulf increases, and especially in Iran, there would be a problem. So the Americans are looking at it, obviously, from a very strategic point of view.
Right. Absolutely. Coming back to you, General, let me take a viewer question as well right now, because related, and it's an important question, and I relate it with Iran. How will I2U2 impact India's relations with other countries is what Shivam Kumar is asking. And I'd like to namely say Iran, because like you mentioned earlier as well, probably one country that is closely looking at these developments is Iran. And India traditionally has had strong ties with Iran. Of late, of course, those ties have gone slightly downhill because of Iran's relations with the United States. But from this perspective, from this particular grouping's perspective, how do you look at it?
Frank, when I'm looking at the India-Iranian relationships, let us remember it is a civilizational connect. But let us also remember that the relationship has not been gung-ho for every single year post-independence. In every conflict which we have had with Pakistan, the Iranians have actually sided with Pakistan. So, but that we can understand, there is an Islamic connect. So they sided with that country. But India still, despite everything, we are in that unique situation. In fact, I think we are the only country which can work with diverse partners. You see, India's got friendly relations with Iran and with the rest of the Sunni world. India has got friendly relations with Israel and with Palestine. India has got friendly relations with Russia as well as the United States. So, we have that capacity. Our diplomacy and the political leadership has actually got that capacity now to deal with countries on a one-to-one basis and not to link things up, which was being done earlier. That, okay, if I have to go to Israel, I must also go to Palestine. Now, those sort of linkages are over now. I think India has got a very firm and a very forward-looking and a very dynamic, I would say, foreign policy, which has been nurtured, I would just say, since 2014. It is a different foreign policy. While some of the ideas are the same, but there is a huge difference in the way it is being implemented. Now, I would also like to bring out one point. We are going to maintain friendly relations with every single country in the Gulf. right? And it is not so much how the Sunni Shia relationship has to be negotiated. I think the more complicated one is the rivalry between Israel and Iran, because we are very friendly with both countries, and how we are going to negotiate that. Because one thing I can assure you, and I have no doubts about it, if Israel attempts to build the bomb, I beg your pardon, if Iran attempts to build the bomb, Israel will attack it. I'm giving you a very straight statement. It is not a diplomatic statement, but I'm telling you that that is my analysis. Come what may, they're not going to listen to anybody. And then, of course, there'll be a totally different situation in the Gulf area. I hope it doesn't come to that. For India, I think our strategic interests are tied up very intricately with what is happening in West Asia, because we are dependent on our energy resources from there. So we want a peaceful atmosphere. We want the Strait of Hormuz to be open all the time so that there is no problem as far as energy flows are concerned. So to us, I think the I2U2 is a very important component of the larger picture. Yes, the other point which I wanted to mention was we speak of bilateral and multilateral relationships. Now we are talking of minilaterals, 3 or 4 countries getting together. Now this minilateral, I will call it the Western Quad, is a sort of a minilateral. It is going to be a game changer in the entire region. And I hope it brings about prosperity in the region, because once tensions go down, I'm not saying there'll be love and peace and brotherhood, but if the tensions go down to a level by which they won't actually start fighting with each other, I think the aim has been achieved. And so long as the energy flows continue peacefully, I think India would have achieved a strategic aim, and that would be our major gain, besides, of course, the economic gains which have been spelled out earlier. Frank.
Sorry, I was on mute there. Sorry. Yeah. Time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward and what next. Starting first with you, Pramit.
Well, the game now is to basically convert the idea of I2U2's economic potential into actual physical gains, which is one of the reasons they've announced those 2 tangible projects, both in energy and in the agro-park area. But the game is that we have to move forward. We have a country now prepared to pay and build a lot of that infrastructure for us. If we can build on this, and it's designed, for example, especially agricultural exports, to help small and marginal farmers in India, to get them to understand and to benefit from international exports would be an enormous boost, because after that, they will start to do this on their own, if you wish. And if having that infrastructure and the training and so on built into a large institutional area with a guaranteed market on the other end would be brilliant. And as I said, this would also include manufacturing groups. If you see the bilateral study done by the UAE and India over their new FTA, within 5 years, if I'm correct, India would gain about $16 to $17 billion to its GDP. UAE would gain, of course, but not to the level of India. And of course, this would become permanent, and we could keep expanding on this. And then if we can add this all FTAs all the way to Europe, then our ability to transcend cargo from here to Europe at a competitive rate would be dramatically increased. And just as we are attempting to build an export-oriented manufacturing sector, the economic benefits with India would be enormous. So we have to convert this into an actual reality.
I think Frank has lost his video. He'll come back.
No, it says the general, you are now in charge. It says.
No, it says I'm in charge, but I'm not really in charge. So,
you can start asking us questions.
Yeah.
I think he's at a power cut or something.
Yeah.
Should we continue? Then, Ambassador, let's have your comments, your closing comments,
Yeah.
and then I'll give mine.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Basically, I agree with what Pramit has mentioned in detail. The effort from India should be to try to enlarge this group and include the other 5 countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council. That would provide a lot of stability. And one of the political commentators has mentioned that India was brought into this whole relationship between Israel and the UAE, which were the primary movers for this West Asian Quad, to provide stability and a balance. And this is something which, because of the obvious advantages by entering into an agreement with India with its huge technological manpower, resources, and now increasingly an outward-looking foreign policy. So it is a step in the right direction. We are engaging more and more, especially with our immediate neighbors. And it is, if we succeed in enlarging the scope of this agreement, in getting concrete projects on the ground, which will benefit all the 4 partners, that would be the index of success of this venture.
I'm back after that brief, drop in the internet connection, some technical issues that are out of hand. But nonetheless, thank you, gentlemen, for taking it forward. General, please close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Right. Frank, I think both Pramit and the ambassador have summed it up absolutely beautifully. I just got 2 very small points to state. One, the proof of the pudding is in the eating. If you want this to go up, the Prime Minister has made a very strong statement, I think yesterday or day before yesterday. Can we implement it? Now, if we can implement this, please, I am very, very sanguine. This $3 to $4 billion which we are talking about will multiply to about $30 to $40 billion within the next 5 years. That is going to be a huge game changer. The second thing which I think is going to take place is there's going to be a great deal of defense cooperation between the UAE. That will be on a bilateral level between the UAE and India. Perhaps the Israelis will also come in with their technology and our capacity to manufacture in India. And third, I think where we really need to move now is for a rapprochement between Israel and Iran. If we can get that rapprochement through, you will find the Gulf the most peaceful area in the world, and it will be, again, a win-win for all. So thank you, Frank.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me on the program. It was a real pleasure to hear your thoughts, and thank you for sharing your perspectives on this very, very important issue. I2U2, the summit, of course, is over. It remains to be seen how things work out and how things pan out. It is on good lines and on good intentions, of course, that the summit has gone forward. Remains to be seen what happens in the near future. General, Ambassador, and Pramit, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining me on the program as well. And what's coming out of this discussion is that the I2U2 summit is an important summit that took place on Thursday. And we've seen a lot of forward movement as far as the summit is concerned, a lot of talk really as far as the economic and trade implications are concerned. But it's not just that. There is more to it. Otherwise, countries like Israel and the United States would not be interested in a grouping like this. There is a strategic angle too. It has not been stated in the joint statement, or it has not come out with regards to any of the foreign ministries or foreign policy experts coming out with this kind of an analysis. But nonetheless, there has to be a significant strategic importance. But let's not forget that both these countries, Israel and the United States, or rather United Arab Emirates, have a very close link with China. So how far they can really push the mantle remains to be seen, because they can't go beyond the point, because they do not want to antagonize China and do not want to create any kind of a rift as far as that relationship is concerned too. So that's the key takeaway really as far as this issue is concerned. And for India, it is a win-win, because we have a strong relationship with all these 3 other countries, and bringing it into a minilateral, combining our efforts and seeing what the complementarities are, is something that will help us or go a long way. Well, that's it from me. But before I go, let me also Remind you to like the video, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and share the content so that more people get to know about Bharata First. I have a message from the Bharata First Knowledge Center as well. Here it is for you.
Cracking UPSC CSC is like running a marathon. To get across the line, you need the right guide and training partner. Look no further than Bharata First Knowledge Center, your one-stop destination for all your competitive exams needs. Classes by the best names and subject matter experts in the field. Courses designed to address all aspects of the challenges at hand. Highly affordable courses priced at less than 150 rupees. Register now at kc.bharatafirst.com or download the Bharata First app now. Avail discounts of over 90%. Happy learning. Cracking.
Well, that is a message from the Knowledge Center. For any one of you who wants to subscribe, go to kc.bharatafirst.com or download the Bharata First app. We have 26 courses in all designed for your UPSC preparations. And not just that, it helps you become better Bharatiyas and prepares you for life itself. So what are you waiting for? Download the app or go to kc.bharatafirst.com and register right now. That's it from me. See you again next time.